Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kakio. Thank you for joining me for Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and tie them with everyday life. The title of today's talk will be Dopamine Addiction, the Curse of the Hungry Ghost. Before we get into that, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. So, one of the things that are really taking over our lives at the moment is technology. Namely, technology with screens. Laptops, cell phones, iPads are all over the place. And as our society becomes more and more digital, we become more and more reliant on these things, to the point where the other day I was at the library trying to check out a book, and I couldn't do it without using my cell phone. It had two-factor authentication, so I gave him my library card, I put in my password as one of these self-checkout kiosks, and then it sent a code to my smartphone for me to type in. So I need my cell phone to get books from the library right now. But what are the effects of that? What does that do to our brain? Well, I found this article that I'm going to share with you today. It comes from The Guardian, and it's entitled Constant Craving: How Digital Media Turned Us All into Dopamine Addicts. It was written by Jamie Waters. So, let's get into it. Dr. Anna Lemke, a world-leading expert on addiction, is concerned about my phone problem. During our interview, I confess in passing to having an unhealthy attachment to my iPhone, checking it every few minutes like a compulsive tick. Sound familiar? Lemke is having none of it. She wants me to abstain from using it for at least 24 hours by locking it in a drawer and going outside. The first 12 hours will be filled with anxiety, said FOMO, but as time unfolds, I'll experience a sense of real freedom. We'll gain insight into my relationship with my digital companion, and will resolve to get back to using it a little differently, she says, speaking with a soothing yet firm tone. I do well to heed her advice. As the chief of Stanford University's dual diagnosis addiction clinic, which caters to people with more than one disorder, Lemke has spent the past 25 years treating patients addicted to everything from heroin, gambling, and sex to video games, Botox, and ice baths. The bespectacled 53-year-old psychiatrist has written an influential book about the prescription drug epidemic, delivered TED Talks on America's opioid crisis, and appeared as a talking head in the 2020 Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, to discuss the drug that is social media. She's a whiz on why we get hooked on things and how we can enjoy pleasurable things in healthier doses. Her new book, Dopamine Nation, emphasizes that we are now all addicts to a degree. She calls the smartphone the modern-day hypodermic needle. We turn to it for quick hits, seeking attention, validation, and distraction with each swipe, like in tweet. Since the turn of the millennium, behavioral as opposed to substance addictions have soared. Every spare second is an opportunity to be stimulated, whether by entering the TikTok vortex, scrolling Instagram, swiping through Tinder, or binging on porn, online gambling, and e-shopping. We're seeing a huge explosion in the numbers of people struggling with minor addictions, says Lemke. That has consequences. Although we have endless amounts of fun at our fingertips, the data shows we're less and less happy, she says. Global depression rates have been climbing significantly in the past 30 years, and according to a World Happiness Report, people in high-income countries have become more unhappy over the past decade or so. We've forgotten how to be alone with our thoughts. We're forever interrupting ourselves, as Lemke puts it, for a quick digital hit, meaning we rarely concentrate on taxing tasks for long or get into a creative flow. For many, the pandemic has exacerbated dependence on social media and other digital devices, as well as alcohol and drugs. And then I'm going to skip down a little bit for the sake of time. Okay, to understand addiction, you must first understand dopamine, dubbed the Kim Kardashian of molecules, owing to its mainstream prominence. The chemical, sometimes referred to as the feel-good hormone, features in countless song lyrics, and its molecular structure, resembling an insect with antennae and a long tail, have even become a popular tattoo, which proves people will get anything inked on their biceps. Rather than giving us pleasure itself, as is commonly thought, dopamine motivates us to do things we think will bring pleasure. As the brain's major reward and pleasure neurotransmitter, it's what drives us to seek pizza when we're hungry and sex when we're aroused. Scientists use dopamine to measure the addictive potential of any experience, writes Lemke. The higher the dopamine release, the more addictive the thing. We experience a hike in dopamine in anticipation of doing something as well as when we do the thing itself, which makes us want to continue doing it. As soon as it's finished, we experience a come down, or a dopamine dip. That's because the brain operates via a self-regulating process called homeostasis, meaning that for every high, there's a low, says Lemke. In this come down state, we really want that second piece of chocolate or to watch another episode, she says. But if we're not severely addicted, the craving soon passes. So I'll stop there for the sake of time. Again, the article is at theguardian.com, written by Jamie Waters, and the title is Constant Craving: How Digital Media Turned Us All into Dopamine Addicts. So, what does that have to do with Buddhism? Well, if we go first to the Four Noble Truths, we'll see that they state life is suffering, suffering is caused by desire, the way to end suffering is to end desire, and the way to end desire is the Noble Eightfold Path. So for the sake of this talk and our further discussion about hungry ghosts, we'll focus on the second and third tenets. Suffering is caused by desire. The way to end suffering is to end desire. Now, we first need to understand that Buddha isn't telling us that desire is bad or that we're bad people if we have desires. He is, however, warning us in the same way that the article does that desire can be dangerous, and that we must work with our desires skillfully in the same way that Lemke says we need to work with our cell phones skillfully in order to ensure that they don't cause us harm. Now, the reason that desire is so dangerous is actually found in the word. The actual word for desire in Buddhism is not desire, but tanha, which is a word that more literally translates to unquenchable craving or unquenchable thirst. So we as humans have an unquenchable thirst for things, for stimulation, be it food, be it sex, be it money. We always desire more. And the reason we always desire more is because of the dopamine, which is discussed in the article. Now, Buddha wasn't a brain scientist, so I don't think he was taking blood samples from people to see what their dopamine levels were, but I do believe that over tens of thousands of hours of meditation, he had an intuitive understanding about what was going on in his brain, and by extension, our brain, which is that we're constantly being motivated to go outside of ourselves and find something to help us with our survival: food, medicine, clothing, shelter. And this is all well and good because in nature there is a self-disciplinary action that takes place, I guess. You can only find so much entertainment out in the woods, right? You may want food right here in this moment, but you're going to have to work to get it. So we have that return to homeostasis very naturally when we're dealing with the physical world. We may want, but because we can't always get what we want, our brains return back to normal. What's so dangerous about our digital age, however, is that come down period, we don't have to deal with that anymore. We watch one Netflix show, we start to come down, our brains start to go back to normal. Nope, we watch another Netflix show. We see one funny meme on Twitter, we get that boost of dopamine, that serotonin, we enjoy it. We start to come down, we go and we look for another meme. We can scroll endlessly on our devices, and so instead of being forced to deal with our unquenchable thirst, we're constantly feeding it. And as the article states, instead of making us happier, it makes us more miserable. The Buddha experienced this himself. He was the son of a warrior king. He was next to take the throne. So he grew up with a life of great wealth and great privilege. We're told that he had access to the best scholars, the most beautiful concubines in the kingdom, endless money to buy whatever he wanted. So if this constant feeding of our desire, of our tanha, was going to work, it should have worked for the Buddha. But it didn't, quite the opposite in fact. He, like us, became less and less happy the more he tried to fulfill his desires. Until finally he left the palace, walked away from it all, and engaged on his spiritual journey. Now, the journey didn't go as planned. He, for a time, became an ascetic, in which case he tried to get rid of all of his desires. He stopped eating, at one point only eating 1 grain of rice a day. The sutras say that he was so skinny that he could poke his belly button and feel his spine. He stopped bathing, he slept under trees, and he didn't realize enlightenment. He didn't realize anything. He almost died, but that's about it. The only reason the Buddha survived, the only reason we are practicing this religion today, is because a milkmaid named Sujata pulled him out of the river while he was laying face down about to drown and offered him some food. It was at that point that the Buddha sat down under the Bodhi tree with the vow that he would not move until he found a way to end all sorrow. Thus, he realized enlightenment, thus he discovered the middle way. And what is the middle way? Well, it's realizing it's natural for us to have desires, but like I said, learning to work with them skillfully. Knowing which desires we need to renounce because they're just too damaging. Knowing which desires are neutral and we need to work with them skillfully. And knowing which desires are actually very healthy and life-affirming and we should embrace them wholeheartedly. That is the practice of Buddhism in a nutshell. So with all of that being said, what is a hungry ghost? And what does it have to do with dopamine? What does it have to do with addiction to our devices? What does it have to do with desire? Well, in Buddhist cosmology, we have something called the 6 destinies. And these are 6 cosmological realms that we can be born into based on our karma. So the human realm lies in the middle. And then we have the demigod realm and the god realms, which are realms where our suffering is so little that we have no motivation to practice the Dharma. On the other hand, we have the animal realm, the hungry ghost realm, and finally the hell realms, in which our suffering is so great that once again, we have no motivation or ability to practice the Dharma. This is why human rebirth is such a gift, because we have enough suffering that we want to practice and realize enlightenment, but not so much that it's a distraction. Now, a hungry ghost is an individual in Buddhist cosmology. They have a very thin neck and a very large belly. And they're constantly hungry. They are beings full of desire, full of lust and craving, but they can never fulfill those desires. They're constantly eating, but they're never feeling full. Sound familiar? It's very similar to us when we're constantly scrolling on our devices, be it Twitter, be it Facebook, looking for something to fulfill our craving, getting endless stimulation, but getting more and more miserable because we never find what we're looking for. Now, I should stop here and say how we want to relate to the teaching of the hungry ghost is completely up to us. Reverend Monshi Kiyozawa, a Pure Land Buddhist minister in the Meiji era, once said that there is no separation between the believer and the believed. Now, he was saying this in relation to our belief in Amida Buddha, but it can also relate to all of Buddhist cosmology, be it ghost, be it hungry ghost, be it gods, spirits, etc. We can understand these items to be literal celestial beings, or we can understand them to be allegories. They are meant to teach us a lesson about the Dharma. Either way is correct because there is no separation between the believer and the believed. The important thing is that we use the lessons they teach us to end suffering for ourselves and for others. So what's the lesson we learn from Hungry Ghost? Well, primarily what we learn is that fulfillment of our desires is not the way to realize happiness or joy in life. Now, some fulfillment of our desires obviously is necessary. If we're hungry, we need to eat. If we're tired, we need to rest. Completely normal, completely natural. However, we need to practice right mindfulness, one of the tenets of the Noble Eightfold Path, to understand when our desires are getting out of control. They reference this in the article. Sometimes it's best to put our devices down. We're not being happy anymore. We're not being fulfilled by them. We're just getting frustrated. We're not learning anything from all these YouTube videos. We're just watching them out of rote, and they're actually distracting us from things we need to be doing in the real world, spending time with loved ones, doing yard work, etc. Now, what's great about this is that Buddhism has many practices designed to help us deal with this curse of the hungry ghost, which we all have because we are human beings living in the world of samsara. So how do we deal with our desires skillfully in Buddhism? One example I experienced was when I was practicing at a retreat with the Venerable Shi Fa. He is the abbot of Cloudwater Zendo and also one of my teachers. And we were at a retreat, and it was interesting for a couple reasons. First, the monastics were serving us food, which is different than most retreats where it's the students that sign up for jobs and someone cleans the toilet and someone else the food and someone sweeps the floor. This was kind of reversed. So we were all sitting there doing nothing and the monks were bringing us food, which is incredibly kind of them. And a very powerful example, right? Because it's very interesting when you're watching these people who you respect and venerate very much, and they're washing dishes and they're bringing food to you, etc. It makes you want to do more, right? So what ended up happening was that we were trying to help and they were like, no, sit down. And then what happened to me at least was I came home and I just cleaned the house from top to bottom. Because I had this desire to help, such a powerful example had been shown to me during the retreat, and I took that energy home with me. So that was one way, simply by setting a very good example that the monastics helped us break away from our minds of desires. In addition to that, the way the food was served was kind of family style. So we were all seated at tables, and imagine there's 4 people at a table, and there's rice here, there's vegetables here, and there's soup here, and we're all serving ourselves. The trick, however, is no one is allowed to talk. So we have to figure out how to get enough food that we get full, but not so much that other people don't get enough. So instead of taking too much, you actually start to take less because no one wants to be that person who stops other people from eating. Again, short wiring that mind of desire where instead of me, I, want, it's, oh, let me look at their plate. Do they have enough over there? Oh, let me look at their plate. They don't have enough rice. Let me hand it to them, right? So this is an example of the practice itself being used to break us out of the mind of desire, the mind that causes suffering for ourselves and others. And then finally, at the end of every meal at the retreat, Venerable Shi Fa and the other monastics would do an offering to the hungry ghost. So everyone, as we were eating, instead of eating every bit of food, we were told to save a little bit for the hungry ghost. We put it on a plate that was in the middle of the table, and then the monks took that to the altar and they gave the offering. So this was an act of compassion for the hungry ghost. It was also an act of generosity. Generosity being the opposite of desire. So where desire causes suffering, generosity causes joy. So that's one way that Buddhist liturgy, Buddhist traditions can be used to help us break out of the curse of the hungry ghost. And that was a real world example from my life that I thought was very beautiful. Some other teachings that I've experienced in the past was never being the first in line to eat. So let's say you're at a family cookout and the food's ready. Hang back a minute, let everyone else go up first. Break away from that dopamine cycle in your brain and practice some generosity in the moment. Also, some of the more traditional practices like making offerings at our altar is a beautiful way to break away from the mind of desire, the mind of dopamine, which causes the curse of the hungry ghost. So when we're sitting at our altar and we're making offerings of food, of water, of incense at the altar, we are changing the programming of our brain away from what we've been doing, which is scrolling on our devices, looking for more, and instead we're giving something of ourselves to other people. And when we do this in the safe space, which is the Buddhist temple, we're also able to give and be more generous in other areas of our lives, whether that's giving a 20% tip to our waitress or waiter at a restaurant, or spending time with a loved one and giving them our full attention instead of turning on Netflix in the background. These acts of generosity that we do in the temple translate to our everyday lives. That's why it's so important to practice consistently and to practice every day. Finally, the act of seated meditation is another way that we learn to skillfully deal with our desires. For example, on Wednesdays when we do our seated meditation before sutra study, what are we doing? We're sitting there, we take the posture, we don't move, and we deal with our desires. Maybe we want to wiggle, maybe we want to scratch our face, maybe we want to check our Facebook or read a book or whatever. But when we hold the posture, in spite of all of those desires flying through our heads, we're creating space between us and our desirous mind, between what we want and what we're actually going to do. And we're realizing that we don't need to get what we want to be happy. We're allowing our brains to return to that state of homeostasis that was mentioned in the article. And we're learning that it's okay to not get a dopamine hit every couple of seconds. We'll be fine. So this is why I stress those traditional liturgies, that traditional practice so much, because again, I don't think the Buddha, I don't think the people who came after the Buddha knew about dopamine or any other brain chemicals, but they had an intuitive understanding of the mind, and they intuitively were able to figure out practices that later on became traditional Buddhist liturgy that help us break away from the cycle of suffering, from the cycle of constantly chasing dopamine. So that's what we can do in the temple, but what can we do outside the temple? Well, like the article said, just put our devices away for a while. And it doesn't have to be anything traditional like what we do during our training, but simply saying, I'm going to go cut the grass in the yard, and I'm not taking my cell phone with me. I'm going to sit down to dinner with my loved ones, and I'm not going to pull out my phone the whole time. I'm going to read an actual book, a physical book, not an e-copy, because I want to get away from my screen for a while. And as we do these little things like that, once again, bringing the practice to daily life, understanding that we don't have to get what we want, have to get that dopamine hit in every moment, we clear our minds and create space that allows us, instead of causing suffering for ourselves and others, to end it instead. Breaking the cycle of the hungry ghost once and for all. Amitabha. So that's talk for today. I hope it was helpful. I'll just end with a few announcements. So this was Dharma Sunday. It happens every Sunday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time right here at this channel. So please make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. Additionally, every Wednesday we do meditation and sutra study, which is a bit more involved. Same time, 7 p.m. And what that involves is a 15-minute guided meditation or reading from a Buddhist scripture, followed by a Dharma talk. So I hope to see you then. Until next time, Amitabha.